Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret, Chapter 18, Streams Flowing Still. He told me of a river bright that flows from him to me, that I might be for his delight a fair and beautiful tree. Tersteegen. When Mr. Taylor was caught away from the heart of China, passing in one painless moment to the presence of the Lord he loved, a feeling almost of suspense held many hearts. What will become of the mission now? Was the unspoken question. Hudson Taylor was a man of such unusual faith. It was all right while he lived and prayed, but now? The thought was natural, but years have only proved that though the father and long-loved leader of the work passed on, the God in whom was all his confidence remains. The lines at the head of this chapter were dear to Mr. Taylor and expressed the essence of his spiritual secret. "It is very simple," he wrote, "but has he not planted us by the river of living water that we may be for his delight, fair and fruitful to his people?" God was first in Hudson Taylor's life, not the work, not the needs of China or of the mission, nor his own experiences. He knew that the promise was true. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. And is the promise less true for us today? Let the experience of one of the leaders of the mission stand for the many. The work is always increasing, Miss Soltow wrote, and were it not for the consciousness of Christ as my life, hour by hour I could not go on. But he is teaching me glorious lessons of his sufficiency, and each day I am carried forward with no feeling of strain or fear of collapse. Streams flowing still. How true it has been in the experience of the enlarged and ever-growing mission. The main facts as to the developments of the last 30 years are given in an appendix, and wonderful facts they are. But here we would only refer, as we turn from the past to the present, to the practical side of Mr. Taylor's spiritual life. He knew that the thought expressed by one deeply versed in the things of God is true. God does not give us an overcoming life. He gives us life as we overcome. And that's from Andrew Murray. To him, the secret of overcoming lay in daily, hourly fellowship with God, and this he found could only be maintained by secret prayer and feeding upon the word through which he reveals himself to the waiting soul. It was not easy for Mr. Taylor in his changed life to make time for prayer and Bible study, but he knew that it was vital. Well do the writers remember traveling with him month after month to northern China by cart and wheelbarrow, with the poorest of inns at night, often with only one large room for coolies and travelers alike. They would screen off a corner for their father and another for themselves, with curtains of some sort. And then, after sleep at last had brought a measure of quiet, they would hear a match struck and see the flicker of candlelight, which told that Mr. Taylor, however weary, was poring over the little Bible in 2 volumes always at hand. From 2 to 4 a.m. was the time he usually gave to prayer, the time when he could be most sure of being undisturbed to wait upon God. That flicker of candlelight has meant more to them than all they have read or heard on secret prayer. It meant reality, not preaching, but practice. The hardest part of a missionary career, Mr. Taylor found, is to maintain regular prayerful Bible study. "Satan will always find you something to do," he would say, "when you ought to be occupied with that, if it is only arranging a window blind." Fully would he have endorsed the weighty words. Take time. Give God time to reveal himself to you. Give yourself time to be silent and quiet before Him, waiting to receive through the Spirit the assurance of His presence with you, His power working in you. Take time to read His Word as in His presence, that from it you may know what He asks of you and what He promises you. Let the Word create around you, create within you a holy atmosphere, a holy heavenly light in which your soul will be refreshed and strengthened for the work of daily life. And that is from the Reverend Andrew Murray in The Secret of Adoration from the introduction. It was just because he did this that Hudson Taylor's life was full of joy and power by the grace of God. When over 70 years of age, he paused, Bible in hand, as he crossed the sitting room in Lausanne and said to one of his children, I have just finished reading the Bible through today for the 40th time in 40 years. And he not only read it, he lived it. Hudson Taylor stopped at no sacrifice in following Christ. Cross-loving men are needed, he wrote in the midst of his labors in China. And if he could speak to us today, would it not be to call us to that highest of all ambitions, that I may know him, the one we too supremely love, and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings? Can we not hear again the tones of his quiet voice as he says, there is a needs be for us to give ourselves for the life of the world. An easy, non-self-denying life will never be one of power. Fruit-bearing involves cross-bearing. There are not two Christs, an easygoing one for easygoing Christians, and a suffering, toiling one for exceptional believers. There is only one Christ. Are you willing to abide in him and thus to bear much fruit? And that's the end of the book and the end of chapter 18. And I would now like to read the epilogue to this book. 1982 will mark 50 years since the first edition of Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. In their concluding chapter and appendix, the authors described how the human leadership of the China Inland Mission was passed on, and how the principles laid down from the mission's inception continued to be followed during the first 25 years after Hudson Taylor's death. 50 more years have now passed since this remarkable testimony to the faithfulness of God was first published. Through revolution, world war, and times as turbulent as any faced in the previous century, the mission has again and again experienced God's power, provision, and protection. He has not changed. China's spiritual need and claims have continued to challenge deeply dedicated young people from the West. Borden of Yell responded to the call of Muslim work in northwest China. He died in Egypt on the way. At about the same time, J.O. Fraser, musician and engineer, was prayerfully laying the foundation for phenomenal church growth among the Li Sioux tribesmen in the southwestern borders of China. As a grim prelude to the testing by fire that the church in China would itself experience in the 50s and 60s, John and Betty Stam from Albion, Michigan, fell as martyrs at the start of Mao's Long March. The Japanese invasion of China in World War II forced many to leave their stations, and the CIM headquarters was temporarily moved from Shanghai to Chongqing. The entire Shifu School for Missionaries' Children was marched off to concentration camp. I shall never forget that march. Our teachers led as we sang, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Separated from parents for more than 5 years, many learned that God can be trusted. But the greatest testing was yet to come. In the late 40s, the communist armies swept triumphantly southward. As Phyllis Thompson has so poignantly described in her book, China, The Reluctant Exodus, following the communist victory, the entire membership of the mission was forced to leave China between 1949 and 1952. Cast upon God for guidance, as Hudson Taylor had been on Brighton Beach 86 years earlier, leaders of the China Inland Mission met in Bournemouth, England. Once again, in obedience and faith, a momentous decision was made. All available personnel would be redeployed as the mission launched forth in East Asia. With headquarters in Singapore, the new focus would be on Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. Later, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Korea would also be entered. For some countries, the time was short, the harvest urgent. With the door to China firmly closed and grave suspicion of anything labeled China in many countries of Southeast Asia, the name China Inland Mission gave place, albeit reluctantly, to Overseas Missionary Fellowship, OMF. The new vision was a church in every community, and thereby the gospel to every creature. The approach was two-pronged. It recognized the strategic importance of Asia's burgeoning urban centers with their concentration of civil servants, students, and factory workers. At the same time, neglected areas and hidden tribal groups, the inlands of East Asia, were sought out. Church planting teams were sent in, languages were reduced to writing, and the Bible translated. In each field, theological education and literature ministries were given high priority. In rural Thailand, the fellowship made its major medical thrust with 3 hospitals and a leprosy control program. Here, too, OMF later became deeply involved in refugee ministries. In 1965, CIM/OMF celebrated its centennial and prepared for a new century. The fellowship recognized with thanksgiving that a mature church was emerging in many countries of East Asia. It longed to become a new instrument in partnership with the churches in obedience to Christ's commission. The result was the emergence of home councils in several Asian countries where the vision of cross-cultural missions was bright and growing. Now those home church councils number 7. Today, the Overseas Missionary Fellowship increasingly serves as a fellowship where keen Christians from East and West serve together as colleagues in response to God's sovereign call. This new biblical partnership is only just beginning, but the possibilities under God are almost limitless. Finally, OMF is still deeply committed to the Chinese people and can never forget that it came into existence as the China Inland Mission. For 30 years, the fellowship has actively sought to call the church to prayer for our brothers and sisters in China and to continue to proclaim the gospel through radio broadcasts. Clearly, God is at work in China today. The fellowship does not aspire to reimpose its former structures, but it does long to learn from our brothers and sisters in China and to respond to their initiatives in new dimensions of partnership and China's matchless service. And that was written by James Hudson Taylor III from Singapore in January 1981. It's been a pleasure to bring you Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret, and I thank you so much for listening. If you'd hit the like button, that would help spread the awareness of this book, and please share with your friends. Thank you so much, and until the next book, this is Kim Droptiny and saying God bless you.